and the privacy officer at Department of Corrections. And the reason that I'm doing this talk this morning is because since I'm responsible for both security and privacy with the Department of Corrections, I've come to notice that they are in some ways relying on each other, and sometimes they are directly at odds with each other. And part of my job and part of any agency's job or any organization that has both security and privacy, which is pretty much everybody, that you're going to have to deal with, is sometimes they work well together, sometimes they don't. So one of the reasons that I come up with this idea of calling it an uneasy marriage is because, like a marriage, the two have to get along well for things to work out. Although, to anybody that's ever been married, I'm sure you can attest to the fact that everything's not always peachy. Everything isn't always wonderful. You hit times in your marriage where you're both at odds with each other. And the important thing is for you to figure out how to work through those trials to keep your marriage intact. On the security side, it's a little less of a bigger deal than it is with privacy, because without security, you cannot have privacy. You can have security without privacy, but in order to have privacy, you must have security. So the two are intertwined, and you kind of have to deal with that and kind of have to learn both sides, the security and privacy, have to have some give and take with each other on how they want to work things out when the two butt heads. And as everybody knows, everybody that's been married knows that when you get into it, everything in a marriage is going along great, wonderful. Newlyweds, you're happy, everything's just peachy, and then suddenly marriage happens. One or the other starts on the other. Hey, we need this, we need that, we need this, and the other one is, I'm not trying to hear that. I don't want to hear that. And how do you get around that? You have to resolve that. You have to figure that out somehow. One of the things that you need to understand about this talk is I'm going to do this at a very high level. I'm going to do this. I'm not going to cover individual data sets. I'm not going to get into technical solutions about certain things. And the reason that I'm doing that is I want you, no matter where you work or what part you play in the security or privacy, is I want you to be able to think your way through some of these examples that I'm going to give you. I want you to be thinking about the implications of them as we go through. I don't want you people digging too deep and thinking, well, if I put, these access control lists in place here, that would help. I'm not getting that deep. This is a broader topic. One of the reasons, going back to the analogy of marriage, that is so uneasy is you can have compliance and legal requirements that may force drawback, that, something that the courts have said or that your agency or your organization has always shared with other entities or to the public. There could be a court case that suddenly pops up and says, hey, you can't do that anymore. So you're going to have to, try to claw some of that back. You may have security threats that pop up that may require less privacy. If you are actively pursuing an insider, it may be more relevant to watch what people are doing on their computers, what sites they go to, the contents of their emails. So, you can have very valid concerns on both sides that you have to address, and sometimes that can put a strain on the marriage. So one of the things I want to do is talk about some examples, and I'm going to start with some examples of where security won out over privacy. And these are also going to be very high level, and most people have probably heard of most of these, and I do not want to get into the political aspects of this, but these are very high level, and I thought they were very good choices of weighing security versus privacy, and you get to see the outcome of what was decided with it. So the first one that I want to talk about or the national security concerns with the collection of internet data. There was an NSA program called PRISM that we found out about with Edward Snowden leaks in 2013. And part of what PRISM does is it collects the internet traffic in the U.S. Now, a lot of people say, well, what good is that going to do? You know, the terrorists are in the Middle East or the terrorists are somewhere else. Traffic on the internet tends to take the cheapest route, not necessarily the shortest route. And the shortest route is not necessarily the cheapest. Because the U.S. has invested so much in our broadband and internet capabilities, it is oftentimes there's internet traffic that comes international through the U.S. bound somewhere else. It's not even destined for anybody in the U.S. and it doesn't originate in the U.S. It's just passing through because the routes that take it through the U.S. are cheaper than the routes that may take it through, let's say, South America or some other places. So what the NSA decided was, let's start collecting that data and sifting through it and seeing, who's talking to who, what's going on, who's doing what, and how we're going to deal with that. And despite what a lot of people think, this wasn't something that was done in a vacuum. You didn't have a group of guys at the NSA that suddenly said, hey, let's go grab all the internet traffic and start looking at it. You can rest assured there were some very high-level discussions on whether we can do this, whether we should do this, what do we do with the data we store, who can we tell we're doing this? Because if the bad guys find out you're doing this, they're gonna quit using that. So there was a risk assessment done. Granted, it wasn't public. We don't know who in the NSA said, hey guys, this is a terrible idea. We don't need to do this. We don't know, and we probably never will know until somebody, 50 years later, they write a book where they cover, what happened or what could have happened or what should have happened. But you can rest assured there was some type of risk assessment done where they sat down and hashed out, should they be doing this? Did they have the right to do this? And how to handle the data and deal with it. Even government agencies aren't going to just act unilaterally in the sense of, one guy sitting at a desk says, hey, I'm going to turn this filter on and we're just going to collect all the internet data. It doesn't work like that. And that's kind of what I want you to think about in your agency or your company or wherever you're at. You always want to do a risk assessment and weigh, the benefits versus the risks. And in this particular case, NSA took a pretty big hit because when it became public, excuse me, there were a lot of people who were claiming, that violated their constitutional rights because they did not have a warrant to collect data. And they didn't have probable cause to collect some of the data on the people they were collecting data on. So that's just something to keep in mind. But this is one example where national security concerns, the security of the nation, overrode any privacy concerns that anybody in that risk assessment discussion, I'm sure, brought to the table. Because believe it or not, there are people there just like us who think, hey, this is wrong. Some think this is right. Some think this is wrong. Again, I don't want to get into politics about, who said go for it, who approved it, who allowed it. That's pretty much irrelevant because it already happened. And I want to focus on the security and privacy aspects, not any political. Along those lines, the next example that I want to talk with you about is the Patriot Act. And the Patriot Act involved mass phone data collection. Now, the risk assessment in this case was more public because the Patriot Act was passed after the 9/11 attacks in 2001. And there was a lot of discussion about the Patriot Act. There's still discussion to this day about the Patriot Act. So you have a case where, Congress is saying, hey, or the intelligence agencies are saying, hey, we need more information. We need to make better use of the information we're getting. We need to be able to pull it all together, and we need to be able to tap into sources that we haven't had before. And there were big discussions, back and forth. It was in the papers, on the news, about the Patriot Act and what it means. And unfortunately, most of the stuff that I think hit the papers and hit the TV stations was pretty much wrong. But, the Patriot Act's out there. You can go read it if you want to. There were a lot of different provisions in the Patriot Act. The mass phone data collection was only one, and the reason I mentioned it is because it does meet my requirements of having security outweighed the privacy implications. And this is something that's ongoing. It keeps coming up every so often. In the original Patriot Act, there was a sunset clause for a lot of the programs. The mass phone data collection was one of those. And then they renewed it. And every so often, there's a big fight and a big discussion or argument over whether we should or shouldn't do that, or if we do it, what do we need? Do we need a warrant? And that sort of thing. So it's important to keep that in mind, that sometimes you can have very real effects of security over privacy. And, this is another example of when security won out over privacy. I wouldn't care to guess, who might have been voted out of office because of supporting the Patriot Act. I know there were some. I know there were some that were voted out because they didn't vote for the Patriot Act. So that's a whole nother discussion. One other example that I want to go over about where security in the larger sense outweighs privacy, and this is an internal at SCDC. Generally speaking, we have a policy that inmates, while they're incarcerated, if their picture is in the paper, inmates at work or doing anything in the institution, their faces will be blurred, so you can't see who they are. There's several reasons behind that, privacy and both security. The security aspect is we don't want his accomplices or people that might be thinking about getting him out knowing where he might be, or what he's doing, or make it easy on him to do that. The second thing is, if you were victimized by an inmate, you certainly wouldn't want to turn on the 6 o'clock news and see his face and about the new trade he's learning. So, we're cognizant of that at Department of Corrections, and we normally blur their face out, so you don't have to worry about it. There is an exception on that, though, and this is where the security over privacy kind of comes into it. How many of y'all in here would feel safe if I started this meeting off this morning? I came in here and said, hey, everybody, I'm Joe Merrifield. Good morning. We just had 3 inmates escape from a work crew right down the street here, and all 3 inmates are wanted for multiple murders. Now, because of privacy constraints, I can't tell you how tall they are, what color their eyes are, how much they weigh. I can't tell you what they're wearing. I can't tell you whether they're black, white, Asian, Hispanic. I can't even tell you if it's a man or woman. Can't tell you anything about them because I can't give you anything that you might be able to use to identify them. How many of y'all would feel safer? I know I certainly wouldn't. And that's me even knowing, they escaped. I wouldn't know what they were wearing, and I would still feel nervous because you don't know who might be the murderer. And in that case, we absolutely will post a wanted poster up with their profile, with their face, and we'll tell you everything we know about them. They're 200 pounds, green eyes, black hair, he's male, white, last seen wearing his tan SCDC clothes. And if we have an idea of where he might be headed, we're going to put that in there too. He might be headed to Spartanburg or Charleston or wherever. And we do that out of an abundance of caution for the safety of the community, so that when you see them, you can, recognize them and you know what to expect. If you see those people, you know, hey, call the police, help us find them. So that's the case for SCDC, where we've decided that the security outweighs the privacy of not putting certain information out to the public. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is I'm going to give you a couple examples of where privacy has won out over security. And one of these is fixing in the wake of certain events recently, is probably fixing to come back to light, but we'll see how it's handled then. But let me move on to the first one. The first one is Department of Justice versus Microsoft. If you Google Department of Justice versus Microsoft, you'll get a list of a lot of pages. There have been numerous times that DOJ and Microsoft have sued each other for different things. This particular court case deals with emails that were stored in Ireland, in Microsoft servers located in Ireland. The Department of Justice went to Microsoft, said, hey, we got a warrant. We want these emails. Microsoft looked at it and said, can't do that. This is a United States warrant. It's valid for the United States, and that data is in Ireland. And DOJ said, I don't care where the data's at. Here's your warrant. Go get it. And Microsoft said, no, we can't do that. And Department of Justice sued Microsoft, or took them to court, and Microsoft actually lost the first case, the first hearing. The first judge, or the first court, ruled that Microsoft had to turn the data over. Microsoft appealed it, and the court then on appeal said, no, Microsoft is right. Data in Ireland is not subject to a United States search warrant. And Department of Justice, this is still being litigated, by the way. Department of Justice has appealed to the Supreme Court. They filed an appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court to get them to weigh in on this. I have not heard if the Supreme Court has denied cert, or if they have agreed to hear the case. I don't know. I haven't. The last I heard earlier this week was they were still waiting to find out from the Supreme Court if they plan to take it. The issues with this one, there's several. Anytime you're dealing with a company, and don't take this as a bad thing, but companies are in business to make profit, to make money. So while Microsoft, and the example that I'm going to give you next, while they're also looking out for privacy, they also have their own interests in doing this. So I don't want you to think, oh, wow, Microsoft is 100% behind privacy, because if they were 100% behind privacy, we wouldn't have Windows 10. But I digress off that. The reason it's a huge decision for privacy is it has global effects for companies. The first thing that would have happened if the court had upheld the original ruling and said, okay, Microsoft, you have to turn over these emails, even though they're out of the country. You can bet that China, Russia, maybe Iran, I don't know if Microsoft has offices in Iran, I don't know. Everywhere Microsoft has offices, you're going to have the courts there go start serving Microsoft with warrants for investigations in their country and want data that's stored in the U.S. And how can the U.S. federal government say, oh, no, that rule only applies to us? Only we can tell Microsoft to go get something. You can't tell Microsoft to come here and get information. That's just not going to fly. And how can Microsoft say, no, we'll let the U.S. do it, but we won't let you? You know, that's a good way that would adversely impact Microsoft's business. Somewhere like Russia may say, then get out. If you're not going to appeal to or handle our search warrants the way you're handling, them in the U.S., then, we'll ban you from operating in our country. It could happen. So Microsoft doesn't want to lose that. And the other thing, if Microsoft has so many competitors in the cloud, and if Microsoft gets told that they have to do this, and if Microsoft didn't challenge this, if they just folded, never took it to court, what would have happened is users of Microsoft would flock to the other services because Microsoft's pretty much saying, we really don't care about privacy. Anybody asks us for anything anywhere, and we're just going to hand it over. So, there are business decisions at work there. They, have to factor that in. The other thing to consider is for Microsoft to deal with the warrants that are going to come in from all over, they're going to have a team of lawyers to vet the search warrants or the court orders and say, okay, this is a valid search warrant or valid court order. Everything in there is specified like it's supposed to be. Then they're going to have people that are actually going to go pull that data and then go back through that data and make sure that what you're giving them, that you're actually giving them what they're asking for and that you're not giving them too much. Because you may have emails where some of it may be out of the scope of what they're asking for. So it'd be a huge expense to Microsoft to have to start doing this for all other countries. Even for DOJ, because you can bet there's other agencies, police departments, even some of your larger police departments, New York, LA, they probably got people that they're tracking in other countries too. They're going to start slinging warrants at Microsoft. Hey, give us information on these swindlers that are in Spain or wherever. So Microsoft, to me, I think they did the right thing in handling this for privacy. With the GDPR that's coming out, it's going to make it really hard for the Department of Justice to even do this anymore if Microsoft is going to be compliant with the European Union's new privacy rules, which they have to be, or they won't be able to do business in Europe. The next case that I want to talk to you about, and this one made the news a lot more than Microsoft's, this was the FBI versus Apple, and this involved the San Bernardino shooter, if y'all remember him a few years ago. His phone, his company phone or county phone, he worked for the county government. The county issued him an iPhone, and he had locked it, and obviously he was dead, so they couldn't ask him for the PIN number to unlock it. The FBI goes to Apple and says, hey, we got this phone from the shooter, and we want you to unlock it for us. And Apple says, nope, can't do it. Don't know how. It's impossible. There's no way we can go in here and unlock the phone for you. We set our phones up so that we can't do that. And the FBI says, well, that doesn't really work good for us. Here's what we want. We want you to go back, and the FBI got a court order using the All Writs Act to force Apple to insert an operating system update or system update for that phone, push it out to that phone to allow them to be able to unlock it. Apple fought it, and before the court ruled on whether Apple could be forced to do that, the FBI dropped their case because they said they paid like $1 million to, I think it was an Israeli company, to unlock the phone for them. Whether or not they were able to recover anything off that phone is a whole nother issue. And the reason I say that is because the man had two phones of his own. He wiped his computers, he wiped his personal phones. The only phone he did not wipe was his iPhone. And that should tell you what the likelihood of recovering data off that phone was. But anyway, the reason Apple protested this is because had Apple been forced to do this, that would have opened the floodgates on them from every police department in the U.S. and other places around the world where they do business. Every police department, government, federal agency, state law enforcement, county law enforcement, municipal law enforcement, all of them have phones that they can't get into. They're going to send a swamp of these court orders to Apple, and Apple's going to have to go into each phone and unlock it. And that gets really interesting of what could happen, because if the court issues a court order and says to Apple, thou shalt unlock this phone, or issue a update that'll allow them to unlock this phone because there's evidence on it, what happens if, let's say, a user had rooted his phone and the update that Apple pushed out, because the phone was rooted, it changed something and it ended up breaking the phone or wiping the phone, and all that data is lost? Could Apple be found in violation of a court order? Could they be fined for not complying with a court order? Could the technician that pushed the update out and wiped the phone, could he be charged with destruction of evidence? How would you feel if that's your company and they came to you and said, oh, we need you to do this thing here and push it out. We got a court order saying you have to. What are your legal protections? What happens to you if something goes wrong? And this may not even be your fault. You don't know. So Apple, I think, did the right thing in pushing back on this one. I know, everybody wants terrorists, and we want to get all the information we can. And let me bring up another very important point that I want everybody to remember about the FBI and the Department of Justice. It's easy to look at them and go, oh my God, look at their overreach. They're just, they're trying to do away with privacy. No, what they're trying to do is solve cases. I was a police officer for a while, and I can tell you what the FBI was doing in the FBI versus Apple case is what you want them doing. You run down, when you're doing an investigation, you run down every lead you have. You don't look at your leads and go, well, I don't think that one's going to go anywhere, so I'll just not do it. No, you run them all down. And, when you hit a dead end, you try to look for a way around it. If there's no way around it, then you move on to the next lead. You run it all the way down till you get something or you hit that brick wall. So, don't think badly of the FBI for trying to solve this case or for trying to get all the information they can. That's their job. Department of Justice, same thing. They're trying to prosecute criminals. We want them to do that, and both of these things are working out exactly as our system intended. That's why we have a court system. That's why the FBI just can't come in and say, okay, Apple, or go kidnap an Apple engineer and say, all right, write an update and do it. That's why we have courts, for these things to be handled. And do the courts get it right all the time? No, they don't. I'll be the first one to admit that, but it's probably the best system out there. So, I don't want people to think I'm slagging on the FBI or the Department of Justice, because, they are trying to do their job, and we need to be cognizant of that and be aware that in both of these cases, you have security and privacy butt heads with very good reasons. It's not like one of them's trying to do an overreach. They're both trying to, all four entities involved are trying to do their job to the best of their ability. So it's important to keep that in mind when we go with this. And now I want to move on to the speculative part of this presentation. And these are unresolved clashes of security and privacy. And this is where it gets interesting, and this is where I want you to think. We're going to look at the collection of user data to include, mobile location, web browsing, phone call data, stuff like that. Now, why is that important? Well, from a security standpoint, location data is very important. I can set up geofencing to where, a user can only log on if he is in a certain building. In other words, he can't go to another building and log in from there. Um, he can't log in from Nigeria. He can only log in from his house and from his office. So collecting that data is important. Being able to go in and say, okay, where's this user at? Where's he going? We're going to track his phone, so we can always find his phone, and we're going to monitor so we know, where our insiders or where our people are. So, when they're inside our premises, we know, hey, he's here, his phone is here, that's him. We can unlock his account and let him access it. It's actually great for security. It's awesome, some of the stuff they're doing with this. The gray line you run into is, let's say you're collecting this location data of your employees, and suddenly you find out that employee A is spending the night at employee D's house. And employee A and employee D are married to other people. Does your company really want to be handed a subpoena for a divorce case because one of the employees found out? If you collect that data, who gets to see it? Who can go in and say, let me see what this employee is doing? It's hot news today. You're seeing a lot about sexual harassment and that sort of thing. But let's suppose you have a supervisor that has an employee that he's taken a fancy to, and he wants to know what she's doing. Well, can supervisors view that location data? Is that not another? In the police department, we would call that stalking. So be careful. If you're going to do that sort of thing, make sure you have controls set up to govern who does what with it, and when they can use it, what it can be used for, and how long you keep it. You don't want, that supervisor being able to go back and pull his employee that he's harassing location data for the last year and be able to tell everywhere she spent the night or everywhere he spent the night or whatever. You really probably don't want to get into that, because when you go to court for that, it's not going to look good. Well, why did you just let him walk in? Why could he access her location data from his laptop? He could follow her around town. Wouldn't need to, because he can tell where she's at. So that's just something that before you implement these things, keep in mind the law of unintended consequences, because you never know what can happen with some of this data that you're collecting. And how long do we want to keep it? A month, a year, a week, 36 hours? Think about what you need and keep the minimum of what you need. But I'll cover that a little bit later. One of the other things that I want to briefly go over is biometrics and what do we do with this information. A lot of people think biometrics are the passwords of the future. Fingerprints, retina scans, Apple with their Face ID. Windows has it on their tablets. I forget the name of it, but it's a Windows thing. When you look at your PC, it unlocks. You look away, it locks back. It's all great, wonderful, except number one, the Face ID stuff is easily hackable. Even the Apple stuff that just came out has already been hacked, and shown people can get around it. But the other thing, let's say you take my fingerprint, and that's how I get in the building or how I unlock my computer. Basically, what's happening is you're taking a digitalized representation of my fingerprint. If my password gets stolen, how do we fix that? We reset my password. I get a new password. Problem solved. If a hacker gets the database of these digitalized fingerprints, how do we remediate that? Cut my finger off, give me a new one? Oh, come here, Joe. We got to give you a new eye for your retina scan because your other one got stolen. Let's pop that thing out here. It's something to think about. I think biometrics are good, but I think biometrics will probably work best when they're paired with something else, like a password or something like that. I'm not a big fan of only needing the biometric to unlock. The other thing is vendors have a vested interest in lowering the amount of error rate for letting you in. They would rather default to let you in than keep you out of your phone, because there's no way to make a consumer mad than to lock them out of their device. So they're always gonna lean towards make it more open than they are let's get it right and get it tight. So that's something else to keep in mind. And while we're covering all this today, it's interesting to note that it's possible to track somebody in some places just by video, by their face. Facial recognition is growing. I read where the TSA is wanting that if you're what do they call that, pre-flight check, if you're on the list where you don't have to go through security when you're flying, they're wanting to collect your image of your face and track you through the airport everywhere you go. Some places are even scarier. For example, Skynet. How many of you remember Skynet? That was the cyborg organization that was in the Terminator movies that was trying to wipe out humans and trying to kill John O'Connor to keep him from defeating them in the future. Why is that relevant today? Well, China in like 2005 implemented this program that they called Skynet, and it's mass surveillance. They're putting cameras all over the country to track everybody everywhere all the time. It was up to like 20 million cameras in 2011. They had jumped up to 100 million in 2013, and that number's growing. I think they said it was like a 15% growth rate per year. So 4 years later, almost 5, you can imagine how many cameras there are. It's safe to say when you're in China, don't do anything because you don't want to wind up like their UCLA basketball players, in prison because they have everything on camera. So, and, China with no sense of irony at all, they named their mass surveillance thing Skynet. So for those of y'all that keep up with the Terminator movies, it's already started, and it's in China instead of actually the US. But anyway, one of the other things that's happening in China is there's a company there that has developed what they call the safe city technology. And what this safe city technology does is it covers all public areas with cameras. Now, the moment you leave your house to the moment you get to work, and even probably some places of work are covered by camera. So when you leave your house, you're pretty much being video recorded, everything you're doing, every second. Now, on the security side, it's great. Crime rate dropped drastically because criminals know as soon as they commit a crime, it's on camera. Their face pops up on these monitors on the side, so all the police officers and even civilians can go, oh, there he is right there. I mean, it's and not only that, you run, grab a woman's purse. Where are you going to go? Home? Cameras are tracking you everywhere you go. Not only are they tracking you where you go, they can rewind it and track where you came from. So, you can't get away from it. The other thing that's really neat is if somebody has a heart attack, if somebody twists their ankle and falls down, even at 2 o'clock in the morning, somebody, starts having a heart attack on the street and there's nobody around, the cameras, the people who are watching it will call an ambulance, and the ambulance will be there like that. So, I mean, it's great for a security posture and security in the sense of even safety of the people. It's huge for that. It just you just have absolutely zero expectation of privacy. And they're looking to push this out to other countries. I think there's a country or a city in Europe, I want to think it's in one of the Scandinavian countries, that is looking at running a pilot of this because they're thinking about doing it too. And this brings up a lot of questions. I mean, not only are they watching every little thing you do, but how do you think they pay for this? I mean, that's a lot of cameras and a lot of people monitoring cameras. Who pays for this? Well, what probably is going to happen, which happens with most of these type things, is like the camera, the traffic camera, red light cameras, they catch you running a red light, they take a picture and they send it to you and say, hey, you owe us a fine. They get to keep a lot of that fine. Police department just gets some of it, but they get to keep part of that fine. That's how they finance that. So what's this safe city technology? What does it leverage to cover the costs? Well, the easiest thing I could think of would be to sell the data. And you might say, well, who in the world would want to buy video coverage of a city, of what people do? And that answer is actually really easy. The easiest one is advertisers. If I know what you're buying, where you go, when you shop, what stores you go to, what you buy in those stores, what brands you buy in those stores, I can be a lot more aggressive in my advertising to you. I can push things out to your smartphone if you have the app installed. It's kind of freaky what all they can do and what they can take, because they're going to see everything you buy. The other issue that you're going to have is, let's say, insurance companies. Let's say they want this data. Well, why would they want it? Well, you think if you eat a lot of fried foods, your insurance might go up, or if you don't exercise, your insurance might go up. If you walk reckless, if you jaywalk, if you cut in front of traffic and run across the street, hey, this guy's reckless, therefore our risk with him is greater. We're going to go up on his premiums. He eats McDonald's 3 times a week, or he eats McDonald's 5 times a week. Let's go up on his premiums because he is a greater risk for a heart attack than somebody else. Even driving, even your vehicle insurance, they can see how you drive. Hey, look, he runs stop signs. He doesn't come to a complete stop. He speeds. She doesn't wear a seatbelt. I mean, it's when you get into this level of surveillance of you, it's pretty scary. And then beyond that, who governs these third parties to make sure they don't resell it somewhere else? Go back to the stalking thing that I was talking about with your location data and stuff like that. How much would a stalker pay to be able to see every single place his victim goes? Oh, it'd be great for him. He could probably watch it on a smartphone. How many of y'all want to come home every day and have your spouse ask you, so who was that chick you stopped and talked to on the corner of 32nd and Vine Street? Or why did you go to that guy's cash register? That girl right over there that was down there, the line was much shorter for hers. Why did you go to that cute guy's register? Do you want to hear that from your spouse when you get home? And live constantly under the threat of, if you smile at the wrong person or you whatever, maybe their spouse might freak out and come after you. I mean, it's scary when you get to this level of surveillance. It's very scary to me anyway. The next thing I want to move into is very popular now, Internet of Things, IoT. And the important thing to remember about IoT is the S in IoT stands for security. And no, you did not misread that. There is no S there. There is no security in IoT. Trust me on this. One of the big security solutions that's out there that's in IoT and is great, or at least is advertised as being great. You know, you can install a home camera system and you can watch it from your smartphone. You can be at work, you can tap in and see everything that's happening in your house or yard from your smartphone. Somebody rings your doorbell, you can answer your doorbell from your smartphone across the world. You could be in France, somebody ring your doorbell back in the United States, and you can talk to them. You can see who they are and what they're doing. The problems with that is, if you don't change the default settings and don't secure it properly, you will have turned your house into the next hit reality TV show, because everybody and their brother will be watching your house and everything going on in your house because you let them in. You didn't secure it. So keep that in mind. If you go to use one of these things, you can very easily, in the way of trying to make yourself more secure, you actually open yourself up to a huge violation of privacy. I don't think many of us want the world able to watch them in their house all the time. So let's just keep that in mind when you're doing. The last thing I'm going to cover on the Internet of Things is I want to show you a privacy policy. This is from 2015. Samsung. This came with their smart TV. It's their warning that they put in their 2015 policy. And it says, please be aware that if your spoken words include personal or other sensitive information, that information will be among the data captured and transmitted to a third party through your use of voice recognition, which means the TV is recording you all the time. And not just to pick on Samsung, but this goes along with everybody. Siri does it. Alexa does it. The Echo, I think, the Google's voice, all of these things, in order for a device to recognize a keyword that you say to it to turn it on, it has to be listening all the time, correct? So while it's listening, you're saying something, it's recording all that. It's keeping that. There was actually a murder investigation where they were able to subpoena the data that was recorded on an Amazon Echo device, and it was actually useful in the prosecution of the murder. I think it disproved the spouse's alibi or something like that. But yes, all that stuff is recorded. And then again, when they record it, do they send that information back to their home servers? If they do, where do they store it? Cortana does. I know Microsoft. That was why my earlier jab at Windows 10. Windows 10 saves a lot of information from you, and it pipes it right out to Microsoft servers, and they keep it. But what do they do with it there? Do they sell it to somebody else? They may say, we have valid, this is why we collect it. We have valid reasons for collecting it. And let's say you say, oh, okay, well, yeah, that's true. But what do they do with it once they've used it for that? Do they delete it? Do they share it? If they start sharing it tomorrow, will they let you know? Do they give you a way to opt out? For Microsoft on Windows 10, you can opt out of some, but not all. So that's something just to keep in mind when you're doing this. So how do we get around this? How do we work through this entire marriage and get it to where it works the way it's supposed to? The way it starts is to make sure that your security and privacy programs only collect the minimum necessary information. You don't want to go in and get more than what you want. If you only need a name, then don't go in and say you need name, social security number, date of birth, address. and everything else. Because if you start your marriage like this, guess where you're going to wind up? You're going to wind up in divorce court. So make sure that you are honest about your needs, what you're going to do with that data. If your security side says, hey, I'd like to take in some of this location data, if you're on the security team and you're pushing for that data, keep in mind how that data can be abused and misused by people. Make sure you are open and honest with the privacy people about what you're doing, what you want to do, what you need, and what's the minimum you need to do, and how long you need to keep it for. Doing that, you work to reduce your exposure to privacy incidents and security incidents as well. Then you want to make sure you have procedures to make sure that that collected data is actually still applicable. You still need it, and it doesn't give away too much. You can do, for example, web collection, where we capture all traffic leaving our network, and some places will even decrypt the encrypted connections. Well, the problem with that is when you get in the business of decrypting private communications, what if you have an employee that's accessing their bank account, or they're accessing their health records? What are you putting at risk by doing that? Is that something you might want to think about and maybe find another way, or maybe not do it? Maybe collect less data. Maybe you just want session data or the net flow data, But that's digging deeper than I want to get into here. So make sure that you have procedures of how you handle the data, and not only what you're collecting, but make sure you have a way to go back in time or go back periodically and reevaluate what you're doing, and make sure that the only people that can access this data are the people who actually have a need for it. And I don't mean a need because, well, they're at the top, we want to give them that right, because remember, you wind up in a stalking incident, you're going to have a bad time. Because you let some supervisor access this, well, because he's her supervisor. Yes, but does her supervisor have a need to know what she does outside of work? Most of us would say, how many of us in this room call your boss and tell your boss everything you're doing outside of work? How many of you would work for a company that required you to do that? Yeah, nobody. That's what I thought. So keep in mind what you're doing and the reasons behind it. When you're doing a lot of this data, a lot of times there's scope creep, and it tends to exponentially grow of what you collect, keep it, and who you let have it. Now, if you have legitimate, somebody comes in and goes, hey, I just thought of this. This would make an excellent use case or business case for some of that data. Then you do your risk assessment, you cover all the bases, and you be honest about it. And I will tell you one other word of caution. There are fewer ways to end your career in security or privacy than by being, as this picture illustrates, dishonest. If you present a risk assessment to your boss and expect your boss or the higher-ups in your organization to make decisions based on a risk assessment, a biased risk assessment that you made because you were not objective when you did it, and they find out that you in essence lied to them because some of the risks weren't as great, some of the risks of not doing it were greater than you said they were, they will fire you, and they are right to do so. And when you go to apply for another job, the first thing they're going to say when they find out why you got fired is, we can't trust you. So even if you really feel strongly about your project, you still have to be honest. Whether you're security or privacy side, you still have to be honest and objective when dealing with the other, with your other component. And that's the only way, just as in a regular marriage, of how you're going to make this thing work. And you want it to work. We really want it to work because it's one of the marriages that's worth saving. So thank you all. Have a good morning.